My name is Josephine A. Paradise. Josephine A. period Paradise.
Okay, thank you. And were you named after someone in your family?
I was named after both grandmothers, Josephine Kitching Taylor and Edna Marie Ashley. My name is Josephine Marie.
Will you tell me who your grandmother was and when she was born?
Josephine Kitching, born in 1895, March 10th, 1895.
And she was born here?
She was born in Potsdam.
So right before it was changed. So tell me, is the house that she was born in still standing?
She was born in the house, the old house on the river there, 210 Atlanta Avenue. It's now rented by the South Florida Water Management District. But she was born in that house in the upstairs bedroom, as were two of her three children.
Isn't that interesting? Did she have any brothers or sisters?
She did not. She was an only child.
Okay, tell me about her parents.
Her parents were Walter and Emma Kitching. Walter Kitching was from Leeds, England. He came to this country in 1867 after Lincoln was assassinated. His father was a stockbroker in London, and they had an office in New York City, and he was sent to New York City to help manage that office. And didn't stay there too long. He was adventuresome and took a wagon train out west and taught school to the Indians in Oklahoma for a stint, went to Texas for a while, and came to Florida and bought property from a government map in Gainesville, Florida. In this area, he bought several parcels in Martin County, and in 1883, he came down to see what he had purchased. And my grandmother, great-grandmother, I should say, Emma Michael Kitching, was from Maryland, and her brothers lived in Orchid Island, Florida, and she came down to visit them one year. And this is how she met my great-grandfather, because he was also a friend of her brother's. He was 48 years old at the time. She was 24 years old, and she had a report from back home that her fiancé was at a dance the night before, dancing a little bit too long with a friend of hers. So she broke off the engagement, and this is how the romance started with my great-grandfather and went on from there.
So
she married him really out of spite to the other fella. But bless her heart, if she hadn't done that, we wouldn't be here.
That showed him.
That's right.
So describe the way she looked in that stage when she was married to your great-grandfather.
She was probably a short-statured lady. She had dark brown hair, had it up in sort of a bun. She was pretty. She always said, "I'm not the prettiest one in my family." Pictures of her show that she was pretty. Her daughter looks like her. Her daughter was certainly a beautiful lady. But my great-grandmother always downplayed herself and said, "No, I'm not really a beautiful person."
But she was.
But really inside, certainly.
She was. Tell me about your great-grandfather's business and what he did for a living before he settled in Stewart or Potsdam.
Well, as I say, he was a merchant. He ran a trade schooner up and down the Indian River from Titusville to Juneau. And he would stock his boat with goods for the settlers along the Indian River. And he had a conch shell on board, and he would have his helper on the boat blow the conch shell to announce his arrival, and all the settlers would come out on their docks because this was their time to stock up. And he did this for a number of years until he got married and decided now he should settle down and build a permanent house and start a family.
Did your great-grandmother ever go with him on
Yes, yes she did. And my grandmother went a short time too, but she was so young, and they were fearful of her survival upon a boat, so they would tie her to the mast as they went along. And you can imagine a 2-year-old doesn't really want to stay still long, so they decided they needed to get some land legs, so they built the house on the water over there today. And then he started a store, a land store in Stewart.
So you have, or there were other Kitchings in the area. Will you tell me about that other family, Sylvanus?
Sylvanus was a younger brother. I believe he was the youngest of that generation. There were 11 children. My great-grandfather was the next to the youngest. Sylvanus was the youngest. And Sylvanus came here on my great-grandfather's recommendation, settled in the Titusville area, and he also had a large family, maybe 11 children. And many of their descendants are still in this area.
The one that became so well known in this
Stanley
area.
Kitching.
Will you tell us a little about Stanley?
Stanley Kitching was one of his children. Stanley, very enterprising. I believe they called him Commodore Kitching. He had a hotel. He was also president of the Stewart Chamber of Commerce at one time. I don't know too much about him. He did not have any children. He and his wife Naomi were married in 1923, I believe, and a lovely couple. She was a lovely lady.
He was very much a champion of the waterways.
Right.
And
bless his heart.
Yeah. Okay, your memories of your grandparents back to Walter and Emma Kitching. You never had any memories of them. I mean, they were gone, right?
They were gone. They died before I was. Well, actually, no. Let me backtrack. My great-grandfather died in the 30s. My great-grandmother died in 1951. So yes, I did know her.
You did
quite well.
Okay. And your grandmother, Josephine. Will you tell us a little about how she was educated, how she met your grandfather, that sort of thing?
My grandmother went to school in this area for a while. She went down to Palm Beach for schooling for a little bit, came back up here to the high school, and was sent in 1909 to Guilford College, North Carolina. It was a Quaker school. It was a prep school, and it was also a college. And she was there for 3 years. And she did not come home except in the summer times. She would spend the Christmas vacations with friends. But one Christmas in 1912, she came home for Christmas break and went to church that Sunday, noticed a young man singing in the choir whom she had never seen before, and learned he was new to the area. His family had moved from Oklahoma, and he was John Taylor. And took one look, and the next day his parents came calling on her parents to introduce him, and that was the way it progressed. She did not go back to school. She stayed here. They had a courtship. They were engaged July 1913 and married March 10th, 1914.
Okay, was that their birthdays too?
It was their birthdays. They got married. They were both born on March 10th. He was born in 1892, she in 1895. They got married in the Second Methodist Church on 2nd Street that burned down, as we all know, and supposedly, from what reports I have read, had a lovely wedding.
Okay, their honeymoon?
Honeymoon at the House of Refuge. They had, they told their friends they were going to go to Cuba, and the friends were waiting at the railroad station, and they really had planned to go to the House of Refuge. They didn't want the friends to know, because certainly they would come over by boat and maybe bother them. So they had their baggage taken to the, fake baggage, let me say, taken to the railroad depot, and then they were whisked away down to the end of Port Sewell with a boat waiting to take them over to the House of Refuge.
So their friends didn't bother them.
The friends were a little bit irritated. And when they came back after their honeymoon to settle in with their house, the friends did not come over and give them the customary traditional serenade that they did for young marrieds. They were a little bit miffed.
Where was that house that they lived in?
The house was next door to her parents' house. It is now 206 Atlanta Avenue. The house is still standing.
Did it go through an evolution through the years, that house?
The house was originally built as a bungalow, one story, maybe 4 rooms, and then as their family grew, they enlarged. They added a second story, they added a porch, several other rooms. They really started expanding that house probably in 1921.
So as 1921 comes, the boom, the excitement about things happening in this county that we didn't have yet. Will you talk about that era and how your grandfather was so active? Yeah.
My grandfather was part of a committee called the Committee on County Division that was formed by Stanley Kitchen. And this was a final effort to make Martin into a county. And this group of dedicated men, originally there were 7 on this committee, and gradually others were added to it. But their task was to get the county started. And it was really kind of a difficult progress because they did not have a lot of outside support. For example, they went to the representative from Palm Beach County at that time, whose name was McCracken. And McCracken gave them a very, almost impossible task. He said, if you get a certain amount of signatures on a petition, I will sponsor the bill to create Martin County. One account that I read said he required 2,500 signatures. Another account in a later paper edition said 3,600 signatures. He might as well have required a couple of million, because in that time there were only about 1,000 people living here. And McCracken really did not want our county to be formed because it was a very lucrative area and a lot of tax money went into West Palm Beach. So he gave them this task realizing that they probably wouldn't get it done. But they were a determined group. I understand that they went out all over the area, door to door. They went to Indiantown, Pahokee, Belle Glade, Canal Point, Port Mayaca, a place called Kelsey City. They went to Jupiter, Juneau, even went to Boynton and Delray, and got, in record time, 4,000 signatures. You see, these outlying towns were a little bit fed up with West Palm Beach also. West Palm Beach was treating everybody else like a stepchild in those days. They were keeping all the good things and doling out very little. The classic case of representation, little representation, and a lot of taxation.
So were you told about the visits to Tallahassee and what happened up there? Can you elaborate on that?
Right. I should backtrack and say after they've got these signatures, they presented them to McCracken, who quickly backed down and reneged on his promise. So then they started going to Tallahassee. After approaching the representative from Leon County, Mr. Davis, who agreed to present the bill before the legislature, what really clinched the deal was Governor Martin. He liked having the place named after himself. So he said, this is going, in essence, he said, this is going to happen. So the bill was presented. Well, after that, we needed people to stand up and say, why should there be a Martin County? So various members of this Committee on County Division spoke and gave their viewpoint. My grandfather was a banker, president of the Seminole Bank at that time. There were 2 banking institutions in the area, and he was telling them that we are certainly a viable, financially responsible area. We have 2 banking institutions with deposits of 1.25 million, 3,800 depositors. We have wonderful natural resources, beautiful waterways, climate. We have many developments on the drawing board, such as industrial, commercial, residential, agricultural, and this can only serve to bring more people, hence more revenue into the area. Also, there was talk in those days about the St. Lucie Inlet. Interesting that we still discuss the St. Lucie Inlet today. It's not a new topic. It was there from the very beginning, dredging, deepening, widening the St. Lucie Inlet in order to bring in more commerce to the area. Others gave their presentation, as I said, and I have in my possession a copy of the speech, the presentation my grandfather made before the legislature. I also have in my possession a copy of a telegram he sent to my grandmother dated May 28, 1925. It simply states, "We win. Martin County passed the Senate at 5:30. And then the rest is history. We know that the next day it passed the House of Representatives. Governor Martin signed it into bill. May 30th, 1925, we began to function as a county. August 5th, 1925. And then my grandfather was elected as the first representative from Martin County in October 1925. And during his tenure in the legislature, he was responsible for getting passed 13 bills for our area, one of which was to organize Jensen as a town. Another bill, very important, was the allocation of $1 million to build roads, bridges, infrastructure for our area.
And you actually have the book that of laws that were passed that year.
I have the book, but I have given the book away. And you know to whom it has been given. He should take good care of it.
The other things that your grandmother told about that first year, about their high hopes, and like, when did he go to the legislature? Did she go too?
I believe he went, it was in November. It was a special session of the legislature. It was not long. She had very small children, remember, at that time. I believe her youngest child was probably 3 or 4 years old. She had house responsibilities. She did go back and forth a little bit, and I remember reading a newspaper clipping that at the end of the session, she and my grandfather went to a game in Jacksonville, and the teams playing were the University of Florida Gators and Washington and Lee.
How interesting.
Before they made their way back to Stewart.
Oh, interesting. So your grandfather continued to be president of the bank and a representative, and he had other real estate deals. Can you tell a little about the things he built and the things that were going on at that time?
He was president of the bank. He was also mayor of Stewart for several terms. He had developments one was called the L. Built Lower, which we know today as the Atlantic Court, that I'm delighted to see is in the process of being renovated once again. It was a beautiful complex at one time. I can still remember it as a child. They had a beautiful courtyard in that area with a fountain. It deteriorated over the years, but as I say, now it's trying to make a comeback, and I hope it is restored to its original splendor. He also was helpful in the building of the Pelican Hotel. Mr. King was a friend of his, and that is a beautiful building still standing today.
The things did not go exactly as planned. Can you tell us a little about what your grandmother said about the times when the bottom kind of fell out of the boom?
Things went great for a number of years, but the bubble burst in 1929, and you were a millionaire one day, you were a pauper the next day. But and my grandfather lost a whole lot. but he was a very resilient person, picked up his family, moved to Jacksonville, had a job there for a while, moved out to Arkansas where he was a bank examiner. His uncle called him to come out there because he was the bank examiner for Arkansas, and he had a job for him, and they were there a number of years. It was a very difficult time, but you know, families pull together. They survived. They came back to the area in the 30s and rebuilt again. They were able to hold on to a lot of their property, but like I said, a lot of it they lost.
Your mother's family, the children, and your mother as a child of the Taylors, what were those children's names and their birthdays?
My mother's name was Emma Taylor, born in October 1917. Her sister Celia was born in 1915, and then a brother came along in 1921, John E. Taylor Jr., and he is still living. He's a doctor in Atlanta.
Did your mother pay much attention to the things that your grandmother was writing down, or at one time she was very interested in it, wasn't she?
My mother interested in it? No, Mother really wasn't interested in it. She was more a business type person. She was interested in what her father was doing. In fact, eventually my mother worked in his business as a young lady before she got married. And my father eventually went into my grandfather's business, and Mother raised her 3 daughters and then went back into the business. So she was always interested from a business standpoint in the family. But grandmother and her scrapbooks, we would kind of make fun of her. Every day she would go through the papers and clip out things of interest. She had a scrapbook on the Indians. She had a scrapbook on her English heritage, the monarchy of England. I've got all of these scrapbooks stuffed under my bed to this day, and they're falling apart. I don't really know what to do with them.
I was impressed with how she continued to write down things like not only the first post office and the first bridges and things like that, but the first condominiums. So she kept recording history till the day she died.
She did. I have newspapers that she saved showing the space shot. You see, kept a chronologue of how far we came down through the years.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
And she would always go through, if there was an article about her family, she would look at it, read it, and if there was something wrong, a discrepancy, she would make a notation there in the margin, you know, if there's a date wrong or a name wrong. A lot of the articles have corrections on them in her handwriting.
That's very helpful. That's very helpful. So tell me about the business that your grandfather established. He started out with your great-grandfather, didn't he? Will you just go through the evolution of his working the grocery store?
When he came to the area in 1912, he needed a job. My great-grandfather had a merchandise store on Flagler Avenue. So he went over there and he told him, "I want a job." My great-grandfather said, "I don't need a worker." My grandfather was determined. He said, "I'll work for nothing." So he started putting the stock on the shelves, doing different things around there, just odd jobs around there. Of course, my great-grandfather adored him. He could not resist him. This was really the son that he never had, and started paying him, I believe it's $20 a month.
And he ended up owning the store or buying the store?
He ended up taking over the store, yes. And then they had a second store. And from there they went into banking. And then from banking, he went into politics. He still had his banking interest. And then during the Depression, like I say, he was in Arkansas, still kind of in the banking field, came back to this area, and in 1937 he established what is still viable today, and that is Taylor Ashley Real Estate and Insurance. He got his real estate license in 1920, maybe it was 1931, while he was in Jacksonville. And he had this real estate license until the day he died in 1972. But started the real estate and insurance business in 1937 with one insurance company. And then my father went into the business with him in 1946. They got the Hartford Insurance franchise in 1947. That was bought from Fred Hancock, who was a Hartford agent here at that time. And we are located on Colorado Avenue. The office was originally on Osceola Avenue. In 1957, my father noticed that the town was growing more out Colorado Avenue, which was really kind of a dirt road in those days. It was a nothing. It was the wilderness. And people said, my grandfather said, "Why do you want to go out there for? There's nothing out there." Can you imagine Colorado Avenue, nothing in 1957? But you can see today that the county has, actually the town has kind of gone out in that direction.
So we have an example of two men that were up there with a vision of the county, that had a vision of what was going to happen to their community with roads and the future. So Mr. Tilton and Mr. Taylor both could see what was going to happen.
Right.
So about the church, since it was so much a part of your family, and since you're here, would you please just tell about how the original land was given and the evolution of the Methodist Church for your grandmother's sake?
My great-grandfather was Quaker. My great-grandmother was Methodist. Very proper Methodist lady. And when she moved here and was expecting a child, there was not a church in this area. And she told her husband, "I cannot raise a child in this area if there's not a church." They had 15 acres in downtown Stuart. They donated a lot to build the first Methodist church in the area. And that Methodist church was located probably in the middle of US 1 today, where the bridge touches down. And that church was purposely put on that parcel of land, I am told, because it was right next to the railroad tracks. And they wanted the people coming through on the train to see that we at least had a church in this area, that we were not a barbaric community. And that church was there for many years. They outgrew the church, began another church on 2nd Street that I have pictures of this church. I think it's a beautiful little building, stone building, beautiful. A lot of character in that building. However, that building burned New Year's Eve, 1916. Most of the town was at a picnic in Palm City. They saw smoke billowing up, and they all dashed back over here only to see that church, and I believe a few houses around it, in flames. Maybe the whole block there in flames. My grandparents were married in that church in 1914. Then, on the property next to that, in 1916, the third Methodist church was built. My parents were married in that church, and in 1955, property was bought out on Route 76. There again, that's part of Colorado Avenue. And a lot of the church members said, "What are you going way out there for? You know, that's just out there in the wilderness practically." So they bought the property and started building the church in 1957. The first building was the Fellowship Hall. My husband and I, Ron, were married in the Fellowship Hall in 1962. That was the church part of that property at that time. Then, in 1967, they built the present church and buildings. And this is where we are today. Right now, our church is in an expansion mood again, and they're talking about adding more buildings. We keep growing Everything is growing in the area. Martin County is still winning today. Martin County has always been a winner, and I would say if we're sitting here 100 years from now, we would say that Martin County still wins. And why? Because of the people we have here. We have super people, people who are interested in preserving Martin County as it is, as it is in much its natural original state. We have a very environmentally concerned county government. This has been very good. From the smallest child interested in recycling to our government, we have people concerned about our resources, our natural beauty. And bless their hearts, I thank God for them.